Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and Happy New Year. I know it's the first week of February or so. I think it's okay to still say Happy New Year. All of us were looking forward to this new year because the assumption was come New Year's Eve of 2020, we could somehow take 2020, trap it behind watertight doors, and leave it all behind us. But unfortunately, at least when it comes to multifamily, those doors are open, and a lot of the regulations, legislation that took place in 2020 now is spilling over into 2021. The inquiries that I've had this year so far have gone something like this. Chris, what direction the market going in? Chris, what is proposed for this year? What's going on with current legislation? Essentially, Chris, what do I do next? So I wanted to record this video to discuss two things. One, where are we right now? And two, what's proposed for this year so that we can prepare ourselves and our investments to pivot on a dime and to not get caught flat-footed so that we still have that positive trajectory of our multifamily legacy. So first, rent control. Rent control is law of the land. Now, there is rent control in every city in California. I still get inquiries from investors. When I tell them that a property is in rent control, they say, really? I thought there was no rent control. There is rent control in every city in California for all properties other than single family homes and other than for properties that have been built the last 15 years. Other than that, everything's under rent control. You need to be cognizant of that. And the reason why I bring it up here a year later is because when COVID passes, and it will, and when the eviction moratoriums go away, and they will, we're still going to be left with rent control. So we need to position our properties, be conscientious of what direction are we taking our rental rates so that we don't fall behind, because if we fall behind, that impacts the value of our portfolio. Rent control. Second, the emergency order. The emergency order that was put in place March of last year is still in place. Why is that important? Because if you look at the terminology, depending on certain cities, municipalities, on the repayment of back rent, eviction moratoriums, rent freezes, a lot of the verbiage has to do with the end of the emergency order. Well, that end has not yet come, and that's still in place. The eviction moratorium was just extended to June of this year. It was set to expire January 31st, but as many of us assumed, they have now extended it. Other than the inconvenience of not being able to enter the courtrooms and collect your back rent, the other caveat that comes with this is the rent relief program that they've set up. Essentially, what they've done is now there is rent relief available. But in order to partake in it, there's a couple caveats. Number one, you have to be willing to write off 20% of the rent. The government will pay 80%, but you basically have to be willing to forgive the other 20. If you're not willing to sign up for that program, then they will pay you the mandatory 25%, but the 25% that's mandatory is not mandatory month to month until June. The tenant can actually show up at the end of June in court and pay you that 25% sum all at one time, and you can't evict. The other component is that the courts will be looking at you, the landlord. Did you try to assist the tenant in obtaining rent relief, government aid? And that's going to be part of the questioning as we head into the eviction trials. Only they can dream this stuff up, but this is where we are. Now, market conditions. First, vacancies are increasing, and it seems like it's not sparing any owner, A location, C location, because I've had calls from our clients in South Pasadena to Southgate, and they're pretty much reporting one of two things. One, they have more vacancies now, whereas opposed to before they had, say, none. And two, for any vacancy that they do have, it's taking 2-3 times longer to fill, and they're getting a half to a quarter of the number of applications that they would have once received. That bleeds into rent concessions. So if you look at the newer constructed properties, they're basically offering rent concessions across the board. And I realize that's a different investment class. You and I, who are, say, mom and pop investors, we have properties built in the 50s and 60s and so forth. It's different, right? Our asset is not like theirs. But given the issue with vacancies, you have landlords now, clients that are calling me saying, Chris, should we consider rental concessions? What that eventually will bleed to, because we've been here before in 2008, 9, and 10, is you're going to see adjusted rents. Going back to our video series, we already predicted this, that for the next 2 years, you're going to see a softening in occupancy, and you would see a softening in the rental rates. Days on market is increasing. Why is that? I would boil it down to this. Right now, we're at a point where buyers and sellers are not having a meeting of the minds. Sellers, having their properties evaluated, say, a year ago, 2 years ago, are still under the assumption that values are from 2019. Buyers are saying, look, if I have to take on a new property where potentially we still have an issue with COVID, eviction moratoriums have been extended, and in other words, there's more risk, I want more reward for my risk. So it's not that we necessarily have seen prices shift, although that is one of the predictions that CoStar has, is over the next 2 years, there will be a softening of prices, not to any dramatic extent, but there will be a softening. But again, this meeting of the minds has caused properties to stay on the market longer. Why? Because buyers are looking for cap rates to increase. A cap rate, okay, we have a video for cap rates, but if you bought a building all cash, what would be your rate of return? Buyers are looking for a higher rate of return. How do I know that? Because we're active every day. At any given time, I have properties, or I'm representing clients who own properties in various geographic locations from LA County to San Bernardino County. And the amount of calls on these listings is dwindling, and the amount of time that properties spent on the market is increasing, and the number of offers that we receive is receding from what it once was. So again, this is something to be cognizant of, and we need to be mindful of the direction of the market as we begin to contemplate, what do I do next? Now, what's proposed? So let's talk about the tax code. I want to be clear here that these are just proposals. There's a process for the tax code to get voted on through Congress and so forth. So there's no fear mongering here, but I want you to know what is proposed by the new presidency. First, they would like to take the capital gains rate from the current 20% federal to 39.6, nearly double of an increase of where we are today. Second, the 1031 exchange. They would like to either alter the rules of the 1031 exchange to create more revenue for the country, or they would like to eliminate it altogether so that each transaction you have to pay capital gains along the way. Step up in basis. This is a big one. The way the tax plan is written is they would like to eliminate the step up in basis. I've put here alter because I don't know that they would be able to pass that. That would be something tough to swallow. But let's just assume they get it through. And this is what you have to be asking yourself. Now that one party has the presidency, the House, and the Senate, how likely, and I'm not here to talk about politics, but you have to ask yourself, how likely do you think it is that they'll be able to get their tax proposal approved the way it is, or how much negotiation is going to take place? I'm just sharing with you what's proposed. But the step up in basis, okay, what is step up in basis? Here's an easy way to look at this. Let's say you own a multifamily property right now, and it's worth $1 million. God forbid, you pass away, now your heirs inherit the property. Well, on that $1 million property, if they sold it, they would pay no taxes, no capital gain taxes, okay? Because they have a step up in basis. If they eliminate the step up in basis, now your kids inherit that $1 million property, and they don't have any shield from the taxes. So they're going to pay the same amount of capital gains that you would have paid being the owner yourself. This is going to change estate planning, needless to say, should these things come to pass. Now, the other piece that I want to put in here as well is Prop 19. Prop 19 is not a proposal, it's law, but we'll talk about it because it falls under taxes. Prop 19 here in California is law. What's Prop 19? It basically states that your single family home that you reside in, or any of the rental properties you own, once they're inherited by your children, the property taxes are going to get reassessed to the current day value. Okay. Maybe you bought your home for $100,000 20 years ago. Today it's worth 1.5 million. The taxes will get reassessed. Now there's different ways to tackle this, and I would point you in the direction of your accountant. But the bottom line is, by the increase of the property taxes, that's going to change the cash flow on these income properties, and it's going to drastically change, obviously, the net income, the estate tax. They would like to cut the amount that you're allowed to pass on to your children tax-free from the 11 million that it currently is to, say, nearly half. So you need to speak with an accountant. You need to review your portfolio. You need to think about, what do these proposals mean? Again, even if they don't get all 4 proposals and they get 2 of the 4, that changes things for many of you that are watching now. Again, we don't want to get caught flat-footed. We want to be able to pivot. We want to be thinking about, okay, should any of these come to pass, what do I know that I would do differently today? So you're thinking, Chris, I'm glad I turned on your video. Thanks for sharing all this sunshine. but here's the point. We have to ask ourselves, so now what? What is it that I need to do? You and I, as landlords, want to be financially secure. We want the ability to take the guesswork out of building our wealth in multifamily properties. We don't want to just survive the legislation as they throw it at us, survive tenant relations, survive trash and toilets. No. We want to thrive. I imagine you signed up for multifamily and you deal with these things because you want to thrive. You want your cash flow to increase. You want your portfolio to go in a positive direction. So what's the challenge? The challenge right now is the fog, seeing through the fog, when we don't know what tomorrow necessarily brings. Look, moratorium, will they extend it again? COVID, are the vaccines going to work? Tax proposals, what will pass and won't? Unfortunately, I don't have those answers. But we have to take what we do know, things as they are, and define amongst the fog a clear strategy, a plan of attack of how do we get from where we are given the circumstances to where we want to see our financial legacy 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Now, again, as a landlord myself, I'm having to deal with rent control. I'm having to deal with repositioning our own units. I'm having to deal with renting vacant units in the middle of COVID. I'm just as tired of the mass as you are. I now have helped over about 250 multifamily landlords like you in the purchase and sale of multifamily properties, 1031 exchanges, repositioning their portfolios, taking into consideration the heirs and what are their needs. And from being on both sides of the table, so to speak, what I can tell you is it boils back down to what we call the 3 pillars of a financial legacy. So, pillar 1, maximization. Under maximization, we're talking about one of 2 things: to build the value of our properties from within, to increase the value of the properties that we currently own from within. You can raise rents or you can complete capital improvements. Now, you might be thinking, Chris, how can you talk about raising rents at a time like this? And that's a personal judgment call. That heavily is dependent upon who is your tenant base. For my wife and myself, we've collected 100% of our rents, luckily, since March, since this whole issue began. I don't know what your situation has been. I don't know what your tenant base is. But what I can tell you is, painting in a broad stroke, 95% of the rents have showed up. As we talk to landlord to landlord to landlord, just this year alone, my team and I have spoke to, say, over 300 landlords. They're collecting 95% or better. So you have to ask yourself, am I in a place where I should raise rents given my tenant base and given my current rental rates? Keep in mind, we have rent control that's still going to follow us past this year into the next year. So we don't want to fall behind on our rental rates, because the rental rates have everything to do with the value of your property. Capital improvements. Should you invest money into your properties right now? That's, again, a personal judgment call. I'll speak for myself. We're still doing capital improvements. We're still repositioning units. Even throughout COVID, we have had tenants vacate so we could go in and do substantial improvements to raise the rental rates on those specific units. Right now, as we speak, they're pouring brand new concrete at one of my properties. Why? Because here's what we can assume. If you look back 5 years, 20 years, 50 years, what's been the predictable trajectory of multifamily properties? They've always gone up. That's right. And so since we know the predictability of values and people need housing, right? If you've watched our educational webinars and luncheons or been to one of our luncheons, you've met Steven Spear. What does he always say? He says that people cannot live on the internet. So the internet will compete with a lot of things. It's not going to compete with you and I because people need housing. And especially when life events come where they tell you you must shelter in place, people need what? They need housing. So again, pillar one, we maximize what we currently own. We take some of that extra capital, we invest it into the properties that we currently own to do what? To do one of two things. Now that we've increased the equity, we're going to move on to growth, and we're either going to do a cash out refinance, pull some of that newfound equity out of the properties we currently own to then buy additional units, or we're going to go through a 1031 exchange because we've increased the equity and we're going to carry that equity over into a new property or properties to increase our net income, increase the number of units that we own. Now, the one thing I'll say about if you're weighing between, well, should I do a cash out refinance? Should I do a 1031 exchange? Truthfully, it takes an analysis. But in general, when you're looking at a cash out refinance, today, maybe the banks will give you 60% of your property's value in cash. If you have a first loan already, from that 60%, you're going to have to deduct whatever the amount of the first loan is, take it out of that, and then you're left with what's remaining. Versus a 1031 exchange, you're carrying over 100% of your equity into a new property or properties. And oftentimes when we analyze this on behalf of clients, we find that the 1031 exchange, by being able to utilize 100% of the equity, makes all the difference. Because if we do a cash out refinance, and by the time we pay off the first, the money we're left with, we can only buy a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex. The price per unit on those properties is significantly more than if you were to buy a 6, 7, 8 unit property. And what does that mean at the end of the day? To you, that means less cash flow. When we're talking about growth, I'm talking about, here's what we want to do. We want to exponentially grow both our income and our portfolio. We want to have also the compound effect kick into place. So again, rent control. Right now, if you own in LA County, you can only raise your rents 5.7%. 5% base plus cost of inflation, which is a whopping 0.7%. So 5.7%. But what if through a 1031 exchange, you could increase your net income, let's say very, very conservatively, by 15%? You're talking about more than double than what you could by holding on to a property and increasing it 5.7. Let's actually increase it by 15%. That's exponential compound effect. Let's say you own a 6-unit property, but you could transfer into a 10-unit property. By having those 4 additional units and raising the rents year after year on 4 more additional units, we're talking about every year the compound effect. It's that much more money year after year after year as you continue to raise rents. And bottom line, we're talking about increased cash flow and increasing the size of your portfolio. Now, if you're in the final phase of your investment life, you're considering more about what's in the best favor of your heirs. If it's the heirs we're considering, I think we can safely say that they're going to need more income in their lifetime than you've needed in yours to create the same lifestyle. Many of you have told me that your children cannot live in the same community that you do just because of the cost of things, right? So we want to reposition our portfolio so we have that much more, so the children, the heirs, whoever your heirs are, have that much more income to rely on. But maybe you're talking about an exit, you're looking at mitigating taxes. Well, with the proposals that we're faced with. If capital gains is doubled, if they take away step up in basis, if they change the estate, how the estate tax is dealt with, what would you do today differently if you knew these would come to pass so that you, your equity, your cash flow, your heirs are all protected? That's what we're pondering and considering in Pillar 3. So we've discussed, where are we today? Where's the market today? This is the facts. This is what's happening today on the ground. We've also discussed what's proposed. We've taken a look at what are the 3 foundational pillars that make all the difference in the building of your financial legacy. In talking with clients that own, say, hundreds and hundreds of units, right? So they're somewhat looking down from the mountaintop, if you will. At some point in their career, they've addressed these 3 pillars, and that's made the difference in their portfolios. So the question remains, well, what's the best option for you? Fact is, we don't know right now. In order to determine that, you have to take a look at a thorough analysis, not an emotional analysis, right? Because right now, if we rely on emotions, given all the hysteria that's out there, we might get stuck being complacent. We might get stuck in the fear of change, the fear of risk, and that's all understandable. So we need to take a look at the math. What would the math tell us in terms of where's our net income today? How is our portfolio performing? And we don't know that unless we take a look at a thorough analysis. So for our personal clients, we take a look at either an individual property, say an entire portfolio, and we take a look at what's the property worth today? How much equity is at our disposal? And most importantly, if we were to take that equity and reposition it into the market today, given current interest rates, current prices, and so forth, how much of a change could we see? See, we'll see a change, but the question is, how much more net income would you see? How much would your portfolio grow? And that amount, does it justify making any changes at all? Or, going back to Pillar 3, by analyzing the portfolio, what's the size of our estate? What options are there? If we're looking to exit real estate, but we're also not excited, even at 20% capital gains, we're not excited, what options are there for us to make a transition with the least amount of taxes possible? The analysis helps with that as well. During this process, if we need to speak with a real estate accountant, a real estate lawyer, any of the professionals that would be needed as part of the analysis, you know, if you've been to any of our educational events or watched any of our educational webinars, we have the network of professionals that will step in if needed to help us along the way to analyze your portfolio, to really give us an idea of how do we change the trajectory of your financial legacy in a positive direction. So I encourage you, if it's been some time, if ever, that you've had an analysis of your properties, your portfolio, please take me up on my offer. It doesn't put me and my team out any. All the information is at our fingertips. We have many, many clients who say annually, biannually, ask us to update an evaluation that we did 5, 10, 12 years ago, just so they can track how their property is performing against the neighboring properties, because we also take a look at rental rates, and also to take a look at how is their equity performing. I'm more than happy to do so. I hope this information is helpful. I hope this helps you in the day-to-day management of your properties. And more than anything, I hope that you, your family, your loved ones, those you care about, are safe at these times. Chris German from the Apartment Dealer, wishing you positive cash flow, tenants who behave, and much protection from Uncle Sam. Till next time.